was 10 years old when my parents left me standing on my grandmother's porch with a backpack too small for everything I was losing. The door closed. Their car engine started. And I remember that sound fading down the street louder than any goodbye they never said. That was the day I learned silence can hurt more than words. I didn't know it then. But 10 years later, that silence would come back to face me. Grandma Evelyn didn't ask questions that first night. She didn't sit me down and explain what had happened. She just took my hand, led me into her small house on the corner of Maple Street in Fort Collins, and poured me a cup of cocoa like it was any other evening. "You'll be okay, my little sunshine," she said. Her voice trembled. Her eyes didn't. That house was nothing like the one I'd grown up in. It was smaller, quieter, older. The wooden floors creaked when you walked too fast. The kitchen cabinets didn't close all the way unless you nudged them with your hip. But in the mornings, the smell of brewed coffee drifted through the hallway and her old radio hummed country songs from decades ago. Life moved at a gentler rhythm there, slower, steadier. At first I kept waiting. I waited by the front window at night, counting headlights as they passed, telling myself one of them might turn into the driveway. I waited by the mailbox in the afternoons, imagining a letter that said, "This had all been a mistake." I even kept my little backpack near the door for weeks, just in case. But Grandma never said they're coming back. She never lied to me like that. Instead, she filled the space they left behind with small, solid things. Oatmeal in the mornings, apple slices arranged neatly on a plate, tomato vines heavy with fruit in the backyard garden. I would follow her outside, watching bees drift lazily between flowers while she moved. With quiet purpose, her hands steady her back straight despite her age. She didn't talk much about strength. She just lived it. Afternoons belonged to Aunt Helen. She would arrive with chalk dust still clinging to her sleeves from school, her teacher voice soft but firm. She sat beside me at the kitchen table, helping me with essays, showing me how to read maps, correcting my grammar with a gentle tap of her pencil. She called me Bright Eyes. I pretended to hate it. Secretly, I held on to it like a lifeline. Between Grandma's steady presence and Aunt Helen's patient encouragement, something inside me began to shift. I stopped feeling like a package that had been dropped off. I started feeling seen. Not because they said it out loud every day, but because they stayed. Still nights were harder. When the house went quiet and the radio clicked off, questions crept in. Why wasn't I enough? What had I done wrong? Was I too loud? Too quiet? Too difficult? Every year on my birthday, I made a card for my parents. I decorated them carefully. Flowers drawn in colored pencil mountains, outlined in blue ink, sometimes a small sun in the corner. I wrote about school, about Grandma's garden, about how I was doing well. I always ended with something hopeful. I miss you. I hope you're proud of me. I imagined them opening those envelopes together, smiling, maybe even pinning one to a wall somewhere. Weeks passed, then months. No reply ever came. I tried to convince myself the mail had been lost, that maybe the address had changed, that maybe they were too busy. But deep down, I knew the truth long before I admitted it. One evening, while helping Grandma clean her bookshelf, I found a postcard tucked between two old novels. It was from my father. The picture on the front showed a beach I'd never seen, water bright and endless under a blue sky. On the back, he wrote about a new job, about a business opportunity, about a trip by the ocean. The handwriting was cheerful, confident. My name wasn't mentioned once. I remember holding that card in my hands, reading it over and over, searching for even a single word that belonged to me. There was nothing. Not a question. Not a, "How are you?" Not even a signature that felt personal. Just distance. Grandma noticed I'd gone quiet. She took the postcard gently from my fingers and read it herself. She didn't criticize him. She didn't curse or raise her voice. She just looked at me and said, very softly, "Some people think love is automatic. It isn't." I didn't fully understand at 10 or 11 or even 12. She continued, her tone calm but certain. "Blood means nothing if love doesn't follow." The words settled somewhere deep inside me. Not sharp, not dramatic, just permanent. After that night, something changed. I stopped waiting by the mailbox. I still felt the ache, of course. That doesn't disappear overnight, but I began to pour my energy into what was in front of me instead of what wasn't. Grandma and I baked pies for neighbors who stopped by just to chat. On Fridays, we watched old movies together, her laughter filling the living room at scenes she'd probably seen a dozen times. Sometimes, we sang along to the radio when no one else could hear us. Aunt Helen kept pushing me to do well in school. "You're brighter than you think," she'd say, sliding a graded paper back toward me with a proud smile. In their house, I wasn't a burden. I was little sunshine. I was bright eyes. I was the girl who watered the tomatoes and stirred the pie filling and set the table before dinner without being asked. Belonging didn't arrive in a single moment. It came slowly in layers. In the way Grandma left the porch light on when I stayed late at a friend's house. In the way Aunt Helen showed up for every school event, sitting straight in her chair like I was the only student in the room. And over time, I began to understand something that had once felt impossible. Family wasn't the people who shared your last name. It was the people who showed up. The ones who poured cocoa without asking questions. The ones who stayed at the kitchen table until your homework made sense. The ones who never needed a reminder that you existed. The silence my parents left behind still echoed sometimes, but it no longer defined the house on Maple Street. That house had its own sound now, and it sounded like love, chosen, steady, and real. 4 years passed in that quiet rhythm on Maple Street before the peace we built was interrupted by a single phone call. It was late afternoon. Sunlight spilled through the curtains in thin gold stripes across the kitchen floor. I was at the table when Aunt Helen answered the phone. At first, her voice was steady. Then I watched the color drain from her face. Her fingers tightened around the receiver and the room seemed to hold its breath with her. She whispered a soft, "Thank you," hung up slowly and turned toward me. "Grandma's been taken to the hospital," she said. Her voice tried to stay firm, but I could hear it trembling underneath. The doctors believed it was her heart, worn out from years of quiet strength, from carrying more than she ever let anyone see. We packed a small bag and drove through streets that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The hospital corridors were white and too bright, the air heavy with antiseptic and something colder. Something that didn't belong in our warm little world. When I saw Grandma lying in that bed, small beneath stiff sheets, it felt like the ground shifted under me. She looked fragile in a way I had never allowed myself to imagine. Tubes, machines, a steady beep marking time. But when she saw me, she smiled. "You'll be fine, sweetheart," she whispered, reaching for my hand. Even then, she was comforting me. The nurse explained she would need extended rest. Recovery wouldn't be quick. And for the first time, the question none of us had wanted to face hovered in the air: who would take care of me? Aunt Helen tried to calculate it all in her head. She was a teacher with long hours and responsibilities she couldn't abandon. She could visit every day, of course. She already was. But she couldn't be in two places at once. That's when she made the call. I watched her step into the hallway with her phone pressed to her ear. She dialed my mother, Margaret. She explained the situation politely, carefully, like she was handling something fragile. For days, there was no answer. Then one evening, the phone rang back. I could hear my mother's voice, faintly, through the receiver, measured, composed. After a pause, she agreed to come. 2 days later, their car pulled into the hospital parking lot, just as the sun was beginning to set. The sky was streaked in orange and pale pink, the kind of evening that would have felt beautiful under different circumstances. Seeing them again after so many years was disorienting. Margaret looked older. Her hair was shorter. The scent of her perfume reached me before her words did too strong. Too sharp. Russell stood beside her, posture straight, expression controlled. They asked polite questions. How is school? What grade are you in now? Their voices sounded like they were speaking to a distant relative, not their daughter. Inside Grandma's hospital room, they stood near her bed and spoke with a strange formality. Grandma thanked them for coming. She told them I needed somewhere to stay until she recovered. Margaret hesitated just a flicker before nodding. Family should stay together, she said, her tone careful, almost rehearsed. That evening I left the hospital with them. Their house felt larger than I remembered. The ceilings higher, the rooms wider, but something about it felt hollow, like sound didn't quite land properly against the walls. Framed photographs lined the hallway. Vacations, business events, smiling faces frozen in time. None of them included me. My bedroom smelled faintly of fresh paint, as if it had been prepared quickly, clean, neutral, impersonal. It didn't feel like a space waiting for its daughter to return. It felt like a guest room arranged for convenience. The first night, Margaret made dinner while Russell sat at the table reading the newspaper. The clink of cutlery against plates was louder than any conversation. I tried to fill the silence. I talked about school, about Grandma, about Aunt Helen. Their responses were short, controlled, questions redirected into safer territory, weather schedules, plans. They avoided looking at each other for too long. When they smiled, it didn't quite reach their eyes. It was the kind of smile people wear in photographs, not in kitchens. The air in that house carried a weight I couldn't name. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't cruelty. It was emptiness. At night, I lay awake, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator down the hall. No radio playing softly in the background. No creak of Grandma's rocking chair. No gentle goodnight, spoken through a half-open door. Just closed rooms, closed conversations, closed expressions. I helped with chores. I kept my grades steady. I tried to take up as little space as possible. Part of me told myself this was temporary. Grandma would recover. I would go back to Maple Street, back to warmth. But as the days passed, the silence inside that large house felt heavier than the silence on the porch years before. It was a house filled with people, but it wasn't a home. My 16th birthday didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a meeting. The cake sat between us on the dining table, candles flickering in the summer air, drifting through the open window. The flames danced gently, almost hopeful. Dad stared at them the way you look at a problem you can't quite solve. Mom stood just behind him, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her smile thin and uneasy. They said they had something important to tell me, something that might take time to understand. My hands were cold despite the heat outside. I remember staring at the wax pooling at the base of the candles, waiting for someone to just say it plainly. Then Dad cleared his throat. He and Mom were moving overseas for work. The words came out smooth, practiced, like they had already rehearsed them in private. A new opportunity, a fresh start. It was temporary, they said, just until things stabilized. Both of you, I asked? They nodded in perfect sync. For a second, I honestly thought it was a test. Maybe they were waiting to see if I'd react the right way. Maybe this was some strange exercise in independence. But the next morning, the house was already filled with boxes. Masking tape labeled furniture in neat handwriting. Mom stood in the living room discussing prices with buyers over the phone. Dad moved through each room with quiet efficiency, unscrewing fixtures, checking lists, speaking in low, clipped sentences about shipping logistics. They were dismantling a life that had barely included me. I followed them from room to room, waiting for someone to explain what would happen next. Finally, I gathered enough courage to ask, "What about me?" Mom smiled, calm, reassuring, distant. They would send money every month, she said. I could continue school. It was only temporary. But something about her tone didn't match the word temporary. It sounded final, sealed. I stood there, heart pounding in my ears. "Can I come?" I asked. The question felt small the moment it left my mouth. Neither of them answered. Dad glanced at his watch. Mom shuffled a stack of envelopes on the counter as if they required her full attention. The silence stretched between us, heavy and deliberate. They didn't say no. They just didn't say anything at all. And somehow that hurt more. I went upstairs before they could see me cry. From my bedroom window, I watched them carry boxes out to the van. Their movements were smooth, coordinated, efficient, detached. A few days later, Aunt Helen showed up unannounced. A neighbor had told her what was happening. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She asked to speak with them directly. I stood halfway down the stairs listening. "This isn't right," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Family doesn't abandon its own." Dad's response was sharp, controlled but cutting. He told her she had no right to interfere, that this was a private matter, that she didn't understand the pressures they were under. Helen stood her ground. I could hear it in the steadiness of her breath. But when Dad ordered her to leave, something in the air shifted. It wasn't loud. It was final. She hesitated only once when she looked up and saw me standing there. Her expression softened instantly. She wanted to reach me. I could see it, but she couldn't. That night, the house felt emptier than it ever had, even before they left. The next morning, I woke to silence. No footsteps, no voices, no doors closing. On the kitchen table sat a folded note in Mom's neat handwriting. Short, clean, distant. They had left early to catch their flight. The note asked Aunt Helen to take me back to Grandma's house until things settled down. I read it twice, then a third time. There was no apology, no explanation, no goodbye. Just instructions. About an hour later, a taxi pulled up outside. Through the thin gap in the curtain, I watched them load the last of their suitcases. Mom adjusted her sunglasses. Dad handed cash to the driver. I wanted to run outside, to shout, to demand that they at least look at me, but my body wouldn't move. I stood frozen by the window as the taxi pulled away its wheels, kicking up a faint cloud of dust. The sound of the engine faded down the street just like it had years before. The house fell silent behind me. When Aunt Helen arrived, her face was pale with disbelief. She found me sitting at the kitchen table, the note pressed flat beneath my palm. She didn't ask questions. She just placed her hand gently on my shoulder and whispered, "Let's go home." Home. The word hit differently now. I packed what little I had, left some clothes, a few books, and the small photo of Grandma and me in the garden. When we stepped outside, the air felt strange, as if even the wind understood something had ended. As the car rolled away, I looked back one last time. The curtains were drawn, the front door locked. A for sale sign leaned slightly against the mailbox. The house where my parents lived had become exactly what it always was, a place, not a home. And as it shrank in the distance, I knew, without needing anyone to say it, that this time they weren't coming back. After my parents left for good life, didn't collapse the way I once feared it would. It forced me to grow. Aunt Helen welcomed me back without hesitation. She didn't criticize them out loud, didn't fill the house with bitterness, but I could see it in her eyes, something firm, protective, unmovable. She worked long hours at school, grading papers late into the night, attending meetings that stretched past dinner. I started noticing how tired she looked some mornings. I didn't want to be another weight she carried. So I found a part-time job at a cafe near downtown Fort Collins. My mornings began before sunrise. The air was cold and sharp as I walked to work, the sky still deep blue. Inside the cafe, everything smelled like roasted beans and warm sugar. The hiss of the espresso machine became the soundtrack of my early mornings. I wiped tables, took orders, memorized regular customers' preferences. Some liked their coffee black, some wanted too much cream, some just wanted someone to say good morning and mean it. During slow hours, I studied at a corner table, textbooks spread between napkin dispensers and sugar jars. I learned how to move quickly without feeling rushed, how to smile even when I was exhausted, and somewhere between refilling cups and closing shifts, I began to notice something about myself. I paid attention to spaces. I'd rearrange the cafe chairs when they felt crowded. I'd adjust a lamp slightly so the light fell warmer across a table. I found myself sketching floor plans in the margins of my notebooks, little ideas about how rooms could breathe better, how colors could soften sharp edges. It wasn't something I planned. It just felt natural. One evening, Aunt Helen found me at the kitchen table surrounded by scraps of paper covered in drawings. She picked one up, a rough redesign of the cafe's front seating area, and studied it carefully. "You see things differently," she said. I shrugged, embarrassed. "My hands were made for creating comfort," she added softly, "not just cleaning tables." A few days later, she handed me a brochure from Colorado State University. There was a design program listed inside. I laughed at first. College felt like a distant dream, something meant for other people. But she didn't laugh. She circled the application deadline in pen and slid it back toward me. Months later, an envelope arrived. I almost didn't open it. I sat on the porch holding it, while the sun dipped lower in the sky, my heart pounding the way it had when I was 16, but this time for a different reason. Inside was a letter offering me a full scholarship to study interior design at Colorado State University. A full scholarship. I read it twice to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. For the first time in a long while, I felt something shift inside me. Not longing, not waiting. Possibility. College wasn't easy. I balanced classes, my cafe job, and late-night studio projects that stretched until my eyes burned. I learned about structure, light, materials, history. I learned that design wasn't just about making things look beautiful. It was about making people feel safe inside a space. Exhaustion became familiar, but it felt earned. My professors noticed my work. They said there was warmth in it, that my designs felt lived in, not staged. One of them recommended me for a small community project, a renovation for a cafe on College Avenue. It wasn't glamorous. The budget was tight. The space was tired and outdated. But I poured everything into it. I painted walls myself, rearranged furniture, created small murals that reflected the town's character mountains in soft tones, local landmarks sketched into corners. I wanted people to walk in and feel something settle in their chest. When the cafe reopened, the owner cried. She hugged me in front of everyone and said it finally felt like hers. Word started to spread, not loudly, not dramatically, but in small circles. People asked who had done the redesign. My name began appearing in conversations. It wasn't fame, it was a beginning. One afternoon, a man named Alan Moore walked into the cafe. He introduced himself calmly, studying the space with quiet focus. He had heard about the renovation and wanted to meet the designer. I thought he was joking. Alan ran a design firm in Denver. He offered me an internship. 6 months to learn how creativity survives in the real world. Deadlines, clients, budgets. I accepted without hesitation. Moving to Denver felt like stepping into a new chapter of myself. The city buzzed in ways Fort Collins never had. Alan's firm was fast-paced, demanding, relentless at times. I made mistakes. I learned quickly. I stayed late more nights than I can count. But Alan treated me with respect. He challenged me, but he also listened. Sometimes he'd stand behind me as I presented a concept and nod quietly, letting me find my own voice. "You're hungry," he told me once. That's a strength. In 6 months, I learned more than I thought possible. How to pitch ideas, how to adjust when clients resisted change, how to protect the heart of a design without letting ego get in the way. When I turned 21, I rented a small apartment overlooking the river in downtown Denver. It wasn't large. The kitchen was narrow. The windows rattled slightly when trucks passed below, but it was mine. I furnished it slowly with secondhand pieces. I painted one wall a warm, soft shade that reminded me of Grandma's kitchen at sunset. I placed photos of Grandma Evelyn on the bookshelf. Aunt Helen gave me a small plant on moving day, and I set it near the window where it could catch the light. That first night standing alone in that apartment, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt anchored. I called Grandma and told her I had sent money to repair her roof. She protested gently, said she didn't need it. "You built my home before I could build one," I told her. She didn't answer right away, but I could hear pride in the silence between us. Over the next few years, my work continued to grow. My designs leaned into warmth and simplicity, spaces where people could breathe, where nothing felt forced. Magazines, began to mention my name in small features, online articles, highlighted a few projects. Then came the moment I never saw coming. The Denver Design Association named me Young Designer of the Year. Standing on that stage under bright lights, holding a glass trophy in my hands, I felt time fold in on itself. I remembered the girl who once wiped cafe tables at sunrise, the teenager who watched a taxi disappear down the street, the child who waited by a mailbox that never delivered what she hoped for. I wasn't waiting anymore. The applause echoed around me, but what I felt most wasn't pride, it was peace. Later that evening, Alan hosted a small celebration at his studio. He raised a toast and called me the girl who turned absence into art. Everyone laughed. I smiled, but my eyes stung, because he was right. I had spent years trying to understand why I wasn't chosen. Now I understood something else entirely. I had chosen myself. When I returned to my apartment that night, I stood by the window watching the city lights shimmer across the river. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the ache of missing something. I felt full, not because the past had disappeared, but because it no longer defined me. I wasn't the girl left on a porch anymore. I was the woman who built her own version of home. One room, one project, one steady step at a time. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, just as Sienna was reviewing fabric samples for a client. The number was unfamiliar, out of state. She almost ignored it. Almost, she answered out of habit. Hello. There was a brief pause, a small inhale that sounded rehearsed. Sienna, it's Mom, Margaret. The words settled heavily in her chest. The voice on the other end was careful, too careful, controlled, polished, as if Margaret had practiced the cadence beforehand. There was no tremor of emotion, no rush of relief at hearing her daughter after 10 years. Just composure. I know this is unexpected, Margaret continued smoothly. Your father and I are back in town for a few days. We thought it might be nice to see you. Nice. Sienna stared at the drafting table in front of her, at the clean lines she had drawn with such certainty that morning. Her hand felt suddenly unsteady. 10 years? 10 years of silence broken by a sentence that sounded like a calendar invitation. Her mind moved faster than her voice. Why now? What changed? Did something happen? Was someone sick? Or was this simply curiosity checking in to see what became of the daughter they left behind? She forced her tone into something neutral. You're in Fort Collins. For a short time, Margaret replied. We were hoping to meet somewhere neutral. Maybe a cafe downtown tomorrow afternoon. Neutral. Sienna almost laughed at that. Okay, she heard herself say, surprising even herself with the calmness of it. Text me the details. They hung up without an I've missed you. Without how have you been, without anything that acknowledged the years between them. The silence afterward felt louder than the call itself. That evening, she drove to Aunt Helen's house. The porch light was already on when she pulled up the same warm yellow glow that had welcomed her home so many times before. Helen opened the door before Sienna even knocked. You look pale, Helen said gently. What happened? Sienna stepped inside, the familiar scent of lavender and old books wrapping around her like a shield. They called. Helen didn't need clarification. Her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. They're back, Sienna continued. They want to meet. Helen guided her to the kitchen table, the same table where they had sat through homework sessions, heartbreaks, and quiet dinners after long shifts at the cafe. "And what do you want?" Helen asked. Sienna hesitated. "I don't know." She stared at her hands. "Part of me wants answers. Part of me wants to prove I'm fine without them. And part of me," she swallowed, "part of me still wants them to look at me like I matter." Helen reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "People don't change just because time passes," she said softly. "Sometimes they only get better at sounding reasonable." The words weren't bitter, just honest. "I'm not saying don't go," Helen added, "but go with clear eyes, not hope." Sienna nodded slowly. That was the hardest part, separating curiosity from hope. When she told Ben, he reacted exactly as she expected. "Nope," he said immediately. They were sitting in her apartment, takeaway containers open between them. Ben had been her constant for years now. Friend confidant, the person who saw her, both at her strongest and her most uncertain. "I'm meeting them," she replied calmly. "I know you are," he said, "which is why I'm coming." "You're not coming to the table." "Of course not." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "I'll just be in the cafe, somewhere, reading a book, looking extremely uninterested." Despite herself, she smiled. "I don't need a bodyguard." "Good. Because I'm not volunteering for violence," he said lightly. Then his tone softened. "But you shouldn't walk into that alone." She studied him for a moment, grateful for the steadiness in his eyes. No judgment, no pressure, just quiet support. "Okay," she conceded. "You can be nearby." "Good," he said. "And if at any point you feel uncomfortable, you leave. No explanations, no staying to be polite." Polite? That old reflex to endure discomfort so others wouldn't feel awkward was one she had worked hard to unlearn. The next afternoon, Sienna stood outside the downtown cafe 5 minutes early. The autumn air carried a faint chill brushing against her skin. Through the window, she could see people typing on laptops, couples talking softly, baristas moving behind the counter. Ordinary life continuing. She checked her reflection in the glass, not for approval, but for grounding. She looked composed, successful, whole. Ben texted from inside back corner, blue sweater, pretending to read philosophy. She exhaled slowly. Across the street, she spotted them. Margaret looked almost the same, elegant, controlled her posture impeccable. Russell walked beside her, hands in his coat pockets, his expression unreadable from a distance. They didn't see Sienna yet. For a brief second, time folded in on itself. She was 16 again, watching a taxi disappear down the street. But this time she wasn't the one being left. She straightened her shoulders and stepped toward the cafe door. Whatever they wanted, she would hear it with clear eyes. And this time, she would not mistake rehearsed words for love. The cafe smelled of espresso and cinnamon when Sienna stepped inside. Her parents were already seated near the window. Margaret rose first. The movement was graceful, measured. "Sienna," she said, offering a cautious smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Russell stood a beat later. He looked older than she remembered, more gray at his temples, deeper lines around his mouth, but his posture was still rigid, as if bracing for negotiation rather than reunion. They didn't hug. There was a brief hesitation, an awkward calculation of distance. Then they settled for polite nods. "You look well," Margaret said, smoothing the sleeve of her coat. "Very polished. Successful." Russell added his gaze, scanning her tailored blazer, the confidence in her stance. "We've seen some articles. Young Designer of the Year. That's impressive. Sienna took her seat across from them. Thank you. Her voice was steady, almost professional. A barista brought coffee to the table. Margaret stirred hers slowly, the spoon clinking softly against porcelain. We've followed your career, she continued. You've done remarkably well for yourself. For yourself? The phrasing didn't escape her. I worked hard, Sienna replied. Yes, of course, Russell said quickly. And we're proud. Very proud. The word felt unfamiliar in his mouth. There was a pause long enough to feel intentional. Margaret and Russell exchanged a glance. It was subtle but rehearsed. Russell cleared his throat. Things haven't been simple for us these past few years. Sienna didn't respond. She waited. My overseas development firm ran into complications, he continued. Regulatory shifts, unstable markets, partners who didn't deliver what they promised. In other words, it failed. Margaret stepped in smoothly. It wasn't anyone's fault, really. Just unfortunate timing. Russell's jaw tightened slightly. We invested heavily, he went on, expanded too quickly. And when the primary project stalled, it triggered a series of financial setbacks. Sienna folded her hands loosely in her lap. I'm sorry to hear that. It wasn't sarcasm, it was simply acknowledgement. Margaret leaned forward, lowering her voice as if sharing something intimate. We've always believed families should help one another in difficult seasons. There it was. Sienna felt the shift before the words fully formed. Russell nodded. We're in the process of rebuilding. I have a strong proposal, solid projections. What we need is a short-term capital infusion to stabilize operations. He slid a thin folder across the table. Sienna didn't touch it. You want me to invest, she said calmly. Not just invest, Margaret corrected gently. Participate, support. This is an opportunity for what Sienna asked. For all of us, Russell replied, a faint edge creeping into his tone. You've done well. Better than we expected, frankly. You're in a position to help. The words hung there better than we expected. Margaret offered a sympathetic smile. We know we weren't able to support you the way we might have liked when you were younger. Life was complicated, but this is a chance to come together as a family. As if money could retroactively fill empty birthdays and unanswered letters. Sienna's voice remained level. How much? Russell named a number. It was not small. And what equity would that represent, she asked. He blinked, slightly thrown. This isn't strictly transactional. It is, she said gently. If I put money into a business, it's transactional. Margaret's expression softened into something almost wounded. We didn't raise you to think of everything in terms of contracts. The irony nearly made Sienna smile. No, she said quietly. You didn't raise me. The words were not sharp, just true. Russell shifted in his seat. We're not asking for charity. We're asking for trust. Trust, she repeated, requires history. His composure cracked slightly. Are you really going to hold the past against us? We did what we thought was best at the time. For whom, Sienna asked? Margaret's tone changed, less warmth, more pressure. We sacrificed a great deal building our lives. The least you can do is stand with us now. There it was again. Obligation dressed as love. Sienna finally glanced at the folder but did not open it. I won't invest, she said. The statement was calm, final. Russell's jaw tightened. You're turning your back on your own family. I'm protecting what I built, she replied. That's not the same thing. Margaret's voice thinned. After everything we've done for you. Sienna met her gaze steadily. What exactly was that? The silence that followed was heavier than any raised voice. Russell leaned back defensive now. You think you're self-made, that no one contributed to who you are. Before Sienna could answer, a familiar voice spoke from behind her. Actually, Aunt Helen said, evenly. Stepping up beside the table, she became who she is. In spite of you. Sienna hadn't known Helen was coming. Helen placed a protective hand on the back of Sienna's chair. I've listened long enough. Helen continued, her tone controlled but unyielding. You left her at 16. You sent promises instead of presents. And now you arrive with spreadsheets. Margaret's composure faltered. This is a private conversation. No, Helen replied. It stopped being private when you made her childhood public property. Russell stood clearly irritated. We're trying to repair things. Repair, Helen's eyes sharpened. Repair requires accountability, not invoices. Sienna remained seated calm in the center of the storm. For the first time, she didn't feel small at this table. She felt clear, and whatever her parents had expected when they made that call, it wasn't this. The cafe had gone quiet in the way public places do when tension thickens. Sienna rose slowly from her chair. She didn't slam her hands on the table. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stood steady and composed. I wish you stability, she said, looking at both of them. But I'm not your solution. Margaret opened her mouth as if to argue again, but there was nothing left to frame as misunderstanding. Russell's expression had hardened into something brittle, pride clinging to the last word he hadn't spoken. Sienna stepped back from the table. I don't owe you repayment for a childhood you didn't give me, she added quietly. And I won't finance a relationship built on obligation. Then she turned and walked away. Aunt Helen followed at her side. Ben stood as she passed him, falling into step without a word. No one tried to stop her. Outside, the autumn air felt sharper, cleaner. For the first time, the finality didn't feel like loss. It felt like clarity. In the months that followed, she heard updates indirectly. Russell's business never recovered. Creditors pursued repayment. A lawsuit from a former partner dragged on longer than anyone expected. What remained of their assets thinned out under legal fees and miscalculations. Margaret eventually separated from him, quietly, without announcement. There was no dramatic collapse, just the slow, predictable unraveling of choices made without foundation. Sienna did not celebrate it. She simply observed it from a distance she had finally earned. Instead of looking back, she looked forward. She increased the support she'd already been giving Grandma Evelyn, upgrading medical care, arranging comfortable in-home assistance, making sure every detail was handled with dignity. For Aunt Helen, she did something different. She booked a coastal trip. Nothing extravagant. Just a small rental overlooking the ocean somewhere quiet, where the mornings smelled like salt and the evenings stretched long and golden. When she surprised them with the tickets, Helen blinked in disbelief. You don't have to do this, Helen had said. I know, Sienna replied gently. I want to. That was the difference. She also signed the lease on her own design studio, a sunlit space with high ceilings and exposed brick. Ben spent weekends helping her paint the walls and assemble shelves, teasing her about perfectionism while making sure every light fixture hung straight. The opening day wasn't grand, just friends, flowers, laughter that felt unforced. Standing in that space, Sienna realized something quiet but profound. Home had never been the large house filled with silence. It was this: chosen family, earned stability, love given freely, not demanded. She hadn't inherited peace. She had built it, and that made it hers. Family isn't defined by blood alone. It's built through presence, through the quiet choice to stay. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't to fight for a place at the table, but to walk away and build a better one. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoy reflective stories about resilience and found family, feel free to follow along for more.